Why are they standing here? Girls standing in the middle of Tokyo to sell themselves. Japan has a serious developing problem. Interesting, because I haven't seen this perspective. It'll be interesting to take a look at what this is. Interesting. That's interesting. Asian analysis?
Now, I got into college a year earlier than most of my peers in the same age because I skipped a grade in high school. So in my first year of uni, people in my class were usually all 1 or 2 years older than me. I know that all of this sounds a bit overboard to people in the West where like 1 or 2 years of age difference is not really a big deal, but in Asian countries such as Japan and South Korea, it is kind of a big deal. For instance, in South Korea, big arguments occur more than frequently when a person who's a year younger do not call the other person hyung or nuna, which means big brother and big sister in Korean. So a year later, in my sophomore year of uni, I was excited to see friends who were the same age as me entering as freshmen. And I was in a bit of a weird situation as, while I was technically unequal purely in terms of age with the freshmen, I was also at the same time a senpai. So as a friend of the same age, but also technically a senpai who has already attended 1 year of university and just knew more about the life here than them, I felt obliged to take some of the newly arrived South Korean freshmen for some food near the campus, such as in Shinokubo, which is the Korea's. And you know how 18-year-old kids are when they feel Tokyo's Koreatown of Shinokubo and Kabukicho are literally right next to each other, with only a few minutes, or depending on where you are at the point in time, are only towards the Kabukicho area from Shinokubo, and we come across this woman standing on the sidewalk, attempting to suggest something to us. And us obviously knowing the reputation that this particular area of Tokyo has, knew better than to respond back to them, so just mostly avoided eye contact and continued to walk ahead. But the thing was, back exactly 11 years ago when this happened, all of such female street toddlers were foreigners. Now, does this mean that all female individuals who conduct sex work in Tokyo are foreigners? Absolutely not. But the Japanese people, at least traditionally prior to the post-pandemic, TikTok-driven Generation Z, were a very discreet group of people, including the individuals who worked in the adult industry. So as ironic as this sounds for a country that has one of the largest adult entertainment industries in the whole world.
Oh, interesting. There's
compose such industries are
little chart data there.
One of the most discreet and circumspect group of people in the whole world, meaning that the female Japanese individuals who were involved in such quote-unquote
these are those streets that I was like in Kabukicho that
the streets and physically touted themselves. The touting for
really
such
stand out.
establishments were usually done by men such as these guys, who usually asked the people walking by to enter such establishments. But right now, things are changing in Japan. There has been news after news about how recently it is now young Japanese women who are standing in the area around Okubo Park in Kabukicho who are bargaining with men as they seek to provide these men with quote-unquote services at nearby love hotels in return for financial compensation.
Interesting.
Now, I know how it sounds a bit superficial of how this practice have long been existing around the Kabukicho area for a long time, but the Japanese journalists mostly did not care back then, as such women were usually older women or foreigners. And also, I know that there is bound to be a comment in the comment section of this video from a guy saying something in the lines of, it's just gonna be the same old reason, girls who are trying to pay college debt, or pay for rent, or saving up to buy expensive handbags, etc. But in fact, these people cannot be more wrong when it comes to assuming the main culprit of this concerning phenomenon of the sudden rise of such quote-unquote standing young women in Japan. So without further ado, let's dive into analyzing the main cause of this alarming phenomenon that's currently happening at the very heart of Tokyo.
Interesting, yeah. Like, what could it be if that's not the case, right?
When visiting or considering any social issues regarding Japan.
It's interesting because women usually get into the like stripping or this kind of sex work in order to pay for college or pay for things to have a career that they can support themselves. But then it's just like, don't they usually want to be in a relationship with somebody? And then being in sex work kind of destroys that opportunity of a serious relationship.
A 23-year-old young Japanese woman by the name of Yuka, let's just say her name is Yuka for the sake of this video, as the police did not reveal her real name, which has been rightfully done so as she is the victim, is feeling extremely lonely throughout her life in Tokyo. She did not attend university as she did not perform too well academically while in school and was originally raised in the countryside region of Japan. And to start a new life, she recently moved to Tokyo, but soon found out that things were not much different in Tokyo, or even worse when it came to curing her loneliness. And Japan being the most introverted, quote-unquote, people keeping to themselves type of country in the world that it is, nobody checks upon her or asks her if she's doing okay. So while on the verge of a mental breakdown,
That's
an
interesting.
idea pops up in her head, which is to download a dating app. She puts her profile on the dating app, and soon enough, a good-looking guy messages her and asks her if she wants to go out for some coffee. She says yes, and there they meet on the first date. On the date, she feels emotions that she has never felt in her entire life. The guy is kind, and most of all, listens to what she actually has to say. For the first time in her life, she feels like a princess and thinks that someone actually cares for her. And as the date progressed, the guy asks Yuka if she could be his girlfriend. And Yuka, already infatuated with the guy at this point, says yes. But
I
at the
sense
end
the
of day,
danger
the
moment.
guy finally confesses to her about what he does for a living, which is that he works as a male host at a host club in Tokyo's red light district of Kabukicho.
Yeah.
Then he asks her whether she could sometimes come by to his host club and nominate him to have a drink so that he can move up in the host popularity rankings. He promises her that things will not be expensive at all and that she just merely has to nominate him.
Yeah, that's what we talked
And when
about.
she visited the host club for the first time, it did not seem as if he was lying. The price that she had to pay to nominate him was only around 1,000 Japanese yen,
$10.
which is only around 10 US dollars.
Yeah.
So day after day, she visits the host club to meet her quote-unquote boyfriend Egawa, which is the actual real name of the guy that was revealed by the Japanese police. But then, day after day, the price that she had to pay in order to nominate her quote-unquote boyfriend increases substantially. According to police investigation, it came to a point where Yuka had to pay around 200,000
Whoa,
Japanese yen,
$1,000?
or 2,000 US dollars to nominate Egawa, in which she did almost on a nightly basis. She knew that she was getting herself into debt,
This is
which she had no way
crazy.
to pay back. But again, given the fact that she was completely enamored with her quote-unquote boyfriend Egawa and saw him literally as the only light of hope in her lonely life, she continued going back to the host club and nominated Egawa on a nightly basis. But as we have all expected, there soon came a point in time when Yuka very much fell behind on her due payments to the host club. And once this happened, this is when Egawa encouraged Yuka to head to the Okuba Park in Kabukicho and told her to just quote-unquote stand there.
Oh my
He
god.
said that if she was just to stand there, then the clients will approach her naturally. And I believe everyone here already knows why these guys quote-unquote approach these women and what kind of service they're seeking. So day after day, there was Yuka standing at the park in Kabukicho.
Kind of reminds me, I
along
feel
with
like I
other
saw
young
some
men
of
who were
this,
also in
but
similar
I didn't
predicaments,
really
making money
know
from
that it was like
women
that's what it was.
services
You know?
in nearby love hotels, then heading back to the host club to pay back her debt. And according to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police, the vast majority of the standing young Japanese women arrested this year conducted such work for the purpose of procuring money to pay back to these host clubs. And the male host of the story, Egawa, was later arrested by the Tokyo Metropolitan Police in April 2023 for seducing, then later actively encouraging Yuka to solicit herself to quote-unquote standing up in Kabukicho and pay her earnings to him and his host club.
Damn.
So now, a lot of you may be quite surprised at this point, as again, many may have initially assumed that these young Japanese women are conducting such quote-unquote standing up work in order to pay college tuition debt, provide for sick families or pay rent, or for the more vain ones, make quick money to buy the Chanel bags, etc. And I'm not saying that these cases do not exist, as after research, I have
can't
found
all
some
be the
cases
case with
where
the
young
host
women from a poor
clubs
family
and
background chose such
loneliness,
standing
right?
up work in Kabukicho in order to make quick money to pay the rent that they're behind on, etc., etc. But then again, these are minority cases, as the Tokyo Metropolitan Police themselves have stated that the vast majority of the young Japanese women arrested this year in Kabukicho for such quote-unquote standing up work were all doing it for host-related cause. Now, I do not know of any single other country where such a large number of female individuals are absolutely obsessed with these, let's be honest, glorified male gigolos with what I would consider as weird hair that leech off the earnings of the female clients. So what is the reason for this idiosyncratic Japanese
Yeah.
phenomenon? Based on my research of reading into myriad different responses written by
Central
various
Road.
women in Japan, it mainly comes down to three psychological factors: loneliness, dangling with irrational hope, or just a plain and simple pursuit of hedonistic pleasure. A lot of the answers provided by the women in Japan gave the reason of loneliness and the lack of general intimacy.
Jesus.
That is the
I didn't know it was that bad.
as one of the key reasons as to why many women in Japan become obsessed with the host culture of the country. To elaborate, for many of the young women in Japan, especially the ones who originally lived and grew up in the known Tokyo regions of Japan and have recently moved to Tokyo, lack the necessary amount of friends and real relationships in general to suffice their psychological need for social interaction
Brutal,
as well as
man.
intimacy. Hence, they may directly step into a host club in order to talk and spend time with these hosts, or as in the case of Yuka, follow an indirect path of first meeting a guy on a dating app who turns out to be a host, etc., which nonetheless ultimately leads them to the nation's host clubs that are located in Kabukicho. And of course, for the case of the older women in Japan, many women replied by saying that as many Japanese husbands begin to have a more colder, emotionless attitude to their wives once they get married, many of the married women in Japan may feel lonely and suffice their need for romantic intimacy by paying and interacting with these young hosts in Kabukicho.
Wow. So crazy,
The
man.
reason is the dangling of irrational hope. Now this one, I really was quite surprised when reading all of the responses from the women in Japan, and I believe their whole mental framework is just quite hard to explain. So please bear with me on this. So a lot of the male hosts in Japan are probably one of the most adept psychological manipulators of women in the entire world, with their entire livelihood depending on how well they can talk.
I didn't
to
realize it was that
constantly
bad,
getting
man.
clients to purchase more expensive champagnes, pay higher nomination fees, which obviously becomes easier and easier.
It's crazy that there's a girl in this kind of a situation.
Infatuated with the male host. So what a lot of these Japanese male hosts do is that they dangle the idea of the boyfriend-girlfriend relationship with the female client in the lines of, if you could spend $20,000 for me this month and make me the #1 ranking host of the month, we could finally have an open relationship and be boyfriend-girlfriend.
Oh, man.
Now, the reason why I say this part is hard to explain is because for most of us who have not been brainwashed by these hosts and have no emotional attachment to them, we know that all of this is just absolute lies. If we reason rationally, even to the slightest degree, we know that these hosts are probably saying this to every one of their female clients to maximize their financial gain. As in, we do not have to be a rocket scientist to know this. But then, if you read the actual answers provided by the Japanese women online, so many of them still defend these hosts, making claims in the lines of, to quote, although they have the job as a host,
They're gaslighted.
they're still at the end of the day human beings. So who is to say that true love cannot develop between a male host and a female client? So in the minds of these women in Japan, they believe that we are the weird ones, blindly judging that no true love can possibly develop between a male host and a female client. So as you can see from this, these male hosts in Japan are
Man.
just some gigolos with funky hair. A lot of them, especially the really skillful ones, are very, very good at what they do, which is to exploit the minds of many of the young women in Japan, especially the more inexperienced, gullible ones, and make them think that true love and relationship
That's
between
so
them
terrible.
eventually manifest reality. Of course, under the condition that the women orders a $2,000 champagne for 10 days in a row at the host club. And as you have saw with the case of young Yuka and the male host Egawa, it is exponentially easier for the hosts to conduct such psychological manipulation to a young 20-something-year-old woman who just moved to Tokyo from the countryside.
Yeah, vulnerable,
compared to,
young and
let's say,
vulnerable.
a 34-year-old woman from Tokyo who have been here and done that, and already had numerous experiences and trial and error with these type of quote-unquote bad boy men. The last main reason as to why many of the women in Japan are so immersed in the nation's host culture is actually quite simple. It's just that they enjoy talking, having drinks, and making physical contact with good-looking men. Plain and simple. Their logic goes in the lines of, a lot of men in Japan also visit hostess clubs and kyabakuras, right?
Yeah.
They talk and have drinks with these beautiful women. Same with us. We like drinking with good-looking men and spending money on them. It helps us to blow off steam. And if we have the financial means that allows us to live this lifestyle,
That's the degree
then
which
what's
I
the problem?
thought it was.
And to be frank,
maximize that. I didn't think people were going into debt.
Motives for frequenting the host clubs is probably the healthiest type of host-female client relationship that there is, compared to the loneliness dangling with the irrational hope of a potential relationship type of causes in which I have mentioned previously. Now, what can we then take away from this whole phenomenon of
Crazy.
the rapid rise in the number of these quote-unquote standing young women in Japan? First, it shows us a glimpse of the dark side of the host culture of Japan. Thanks to the recent rise of many celebrity hosts in Japan, the host scene in Japan is now more mainstream than ever before.
Not my
This means
type.
that less women perceive these hosts as these quote-unquote adult industry increases their popularity and demand, which then in turn alters them to selling video to take these issues regarding Japan happening not in a real country, that Japan is just this really weird, quirky country full of anime, otakus, and a bunch of other centricities.
Yes.
And once again, everything happening
So we think it
inside
is.
the country is something that is just intangible and not real life.
Oh, interesting.
For instance, in our previous homeless teenager
Oh my goodness.
Tokyo video that we made that
Homeless
almost went over
teenager?
1 million views,
My God.
before we had to delete it due to us mentioning some information about a hotel chain located in Kabukicho, there were so many comments in the lines of, to quote, heading to Japan right now, more the reason to go to Japan. Like, here we are discussing a serious issue about domestic violence and
Jesus.
potentially S violence conducted onto minors.
Oh,
And
that's
there's
brutal.
a bunch of people joking around saying that they're heading to Japan right now as they think this is cool and want to come check it out. So through this video, we hope that the message gets across to the people residing in the West that Japan, despite all the eccentricities in which they do have, is just as much a real country filled with real people.
Of course it is.
With real problems as much as the US or any other country.
The problems are just very different from the US.
Which is our sincere urge for all it has just so funny. So go up to this park where these girls are.
Yeah. So, totally. I mean, obviously, Japanese people are people, and it's just the problems that we see them have versus the problems that we have here are just so different that our understanding, it requires extra analysis. It's not quickly just jumps into purview and it's easily digestible. That's crazy. I did not know that it was like that. Loneliness went to that degree because when I was in Japan, I really enjoyed the fact that people kept to themselves, to the factor of, you know, nobody's going to get up in your business. Nobody's going to like ask you a question, try and start a like sometimes it's just a little like, yeah. Somebody on the train started asking me a question or like, you know, they want to share about themselves. So it's just like, oh man, I don't really know what to talk to you right now. You know, and I don't mean to be mean. And sometimes it's good to have conversations and meet somebody and, you know, develop a connection or just in passing. But I'm naturally don't mind keeping to myself. I feel like there's got to be there's a time and a place for everything, right? And it looks like they don't have just any connection or any relationships forming, not necessarily intimate, but just like at all. So they're lonely there, which is terrible. Yeah, I had no idea that that's what was happening with this. And I just honestly, I was like, there's like 5 chicks lined up and they're just texting people. I thought, this kind of seems, why are they so perfectly lined up? When I kind of saw something that maybe was this in Japan when I was there, that's not the first thing that came to me. I don't know.